Hello my crafty friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Monica and in today's video we are making this adorable Flexi Coin Pouch. This little pouch is a fantastic scrub buster, and the best part, you can download a free PDF pattern from my website. The link is in the description box below. This pouch has a flap with a snap closure, a flexi frame at the top, so it is super easy to open and close, a fully lined main compartment, and a handy back pocket. You can use it as a mini wallet and keep your coins inside, keep your notes and cards in the back pocket, or even store your earphones, keys, or other smaller items. If you want to make this pouch with me, then grab your favorite fabric scraps, download the template, and let's get started. To make your pouch, you will need some external and lining fabric. For my pouch, I decided to use the faux leather on the external front and back panels, this beautiful printed waterproof canvas for the flap, and I'm also using waterproof canvas for the lining. You will also need one flexi frame. This one is 8.5 centimeters and it comes with a little pin. So this pin is very important, so make sure you don't lose it, keep it safe. We will need this pin at the very end. Once we construct our pouch and we insert our flexi frame, as you can see, one side of the frame is open, so we can insert it into our project. So when we are done with that step, then we'll use this pin to secure this open end. So make sure you keep this little pin safe. You will also need a closure. I'm using metal spring press snap, but you can use magnetic snap or even a small turn lock if you prefer. If you are using very lightweight, drapey or stretchy fabric, I highly recommend fusing some woven interfacing to the back of the fabric to give your fabric a little bit more structure and stability. However, because I'm using faux leather and waterproof canvas, my fabric is already sturdy enough, so I don't really have to worry about it. But I will use Decovil Light, which is a type of fusible stabilizer on the flap, since my fabric is very thin and drapey. I like to have a very sturdy flap on a finished pouch, like on this sample. If I don't add any stabilizer, then this flap is going to be very floppy and soft, and I don't really like it. However, depending on your preference and what type of fabric you are using on your pouch, you may not need any stabilizer. To begin, cut 2 top trims from external fabric, 1 front and 1 back from external fabric. Make sure to mark the snap placement on the wrong side of the front piece. You will also need to cut 1 front and 1 back from your lining fabric, and 1 flap from external fabric and your lining fabric. Depending on what type of closure you are using, you will have to mark the snap placement either on the right or wrong side of your fabric. Since I'm using press snap, I had to mark my fabric on the right side, because I'm going to install this part of the snap once my flap is assembled. So I need to know exactly where to punch the hole. But if you are using magnetic snap, then you will have to install it before you assemble your pouch, which means you can mark the wrong side of the fabric. To reduce bulk at the seams, I highly recommend fusing your stabilizer without the seam allowance, and this is exactly what I've done on my flap. Another thing I want to mention before we proceed is that I like to trim off my stabilizer at those 2 bottom corners. So this is the bottom edge of my pouch, and I like to snip just the corner of my stabilizer away So this will ensure that once my pouch is finished, I have those nice sharp corners on my pouch. Take your flap pieces and place them right sides together. Line up the edges and then clip them together. Here we go. When you are ready, you can take this to the machine, and what we're going to do is sew the seam only along the flap. So do not stitch those sides or the bottom edge. You are only stitching the seam along the flap. So you're going to start here, sew the seam, and then end here. If you have one, grab your pinking shears and then trim the seam allowance by half. If you don't have pinking shears, you can use your regular scissors. And again, simply trim the seam allowance by half. When you are ready, go ahead and turn your flap right side out. I like to use my corner shaper to just push that flap, push the seam. So just take your time, don't rush. This can be a little bit fiddly, especially if you added stabilizer. When you are ready, go to the pressing station and press your seam nice and flat. Here we go. Then you can take this to the machine and top stitch along that finished seam. Go ahead and install the female part of your press snap. Then take the male part of your press snap and install it to the external front. I have separate video tutorials that will show you exactly how to install magnetic snap or press snaps. So check them out if you need some help. First, we're going to assemble our trims. So what you want to do is to take this to the pressing station. Fold the shorter edges under by 1 centimeter and then press them nice and flat. Otherwise, what you can do is to take a ruler and a pen, measure 2 centimeters from the side edge and draw a line. Do that on the other side as well. Then if you want, you can add a double-sided tape if you don't want to press your fabric, just like that. You can remove the plastic cover and then fold the edge and bring it towards the line, just like that. This way you will have a very nice and neat fold, and you're going to do that on the other side as well. Here we go, just like that. So now we're going to take this to the machine and top stitch our trims on both sides. Now you can fold your top trims in half, wrong sides together, just like that. Line up your raw edges and then pin or clip them in place. Do that on both of your trims. Here we go. Then we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to baste our raw edges together. Next, you're going to take your trims and place them on the external front and back panels. So make sure you have midpoints marked along those raw edges and the top of your front and back panels so you can match them. So now you're going to place your trim on top. Right sides are facing each other. Make sure to match your midpoints. Align your edges and then clip or pin them together, just like that. Do that for the back panel as well. So again, match your midpoints and align your edges. Here we go. If you want, you can take this to the machine and baste your trim to the external panels. Otherwise, you can take your lining pieces and place them on top. So right sides are facing each other. You're going to line up the top edge, make sure your midpoints are aligned, and then simply move those clips to hold everything in place. I'm going to do that on the front as well. Here we go. Then you can take this to the machine and sew the seam. Next, you can take this to the pressing station, separate your pieces, bring the seam allowance down. So bring the seam allowance towards the external front or back panel. So it should face towards the external fabric. Then what you can do is to press the seam nice and flat, but since I'm using faux leather, I cannot really press that fabric, so I'm just going to finger press it instead. When you are ready, you can take this to the machine and top stitch along that finished seam. So make sure to keep your lining out of the way, and you're going to do exactly the same thing on the back panel. So again, you're going to press the seam nice and flat and then top stitch along that seam. Now you can take this to the pressing station, bring those two pieces wrong sides together, and then you can press the seam nice and flat. So I'm going to press this seam gently, not to burn my fabric. Then you're going to take your back piece, flip the lining out of the way. Then you're going to take your flap and place it on top. So right sides are facing up. What you want to do is to line up the bottom edge, clip it together, and then line up the sides. Your side panels are slightly longer, so they're going to extend beyond the external back panel. So what you're going to do is to move your flap and align those edges. And then clip them together. And then you're going to do that on the other side as well. Here we go. Next, you can take this to the machine and simply baste your flap to the external panel along those 3 sides. Before we proceed to the next step and assemble our pouch, I want to mention something. To create beautiful sharp corner on your finished pouch, what you want to do is to draw your stitching line on the wrong side of the fabric. So in the next step, we're going to line up those pieces right sides together, but it is easier to mark your seam allowance before you pin everything together. So what you want to do is to take a ruler and a pen and measure 1 centimeter and draw your stitching line. You can do that just at the corner, so you don't have to draw the entire stitching line if you don't want to. Just like that. When you are at the machine, what you need to do is to, instead of sewing the entire seam up to the corner, then pivot your fabric at the corner and continue sewing the seam, is to stop about 1 stitch or 2 stitches before you get to the corner, and then pivot your fabric and then stitch that corner diagonally. So you would stitch your corner like this. This might be a little bit counterintuitive, but it produces more neat and sharp corners. And you would do exactly the same thing on the lining. So again, you want to mark your seam allowance. And then draw a little triangle at the corner. Now we can assemble our pouch. So what you want to do is to place those pieces right sides together. Make sure your external pieces are paired and then lining pieces are paired. So don't line it up like this. You want to start at the seam. So match your seam. Align the edges and then clip them together. So I'm just going to make sure my seam is straight, everything is aligned. I'm going to do that on the other side as well. You want to make sure this seam is nice and neat. Here we go. And then you can line up the remaining edges. So you'll have to push that back pocket slightly because it creates a little fold. So make sure you don't stitch over any fold. So push that pocket to the center, line up your edges. Again, push that pocket to the center. Line up your edges, clip them together, line up the bottom. Here we go. Then you're going to do that along the lining. So again, line up your edges and clip them together. When it comes to the bottom edge, what you want to do, keep your flap out of the way. So I'm going to fold my flap slightly so I can line up my edges. Here we go. So next we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to sew all 4 seams. But we need to leave an opening somewhere around the bottom edge on the lining, so later we can turn our pouch right side out. So what I like to do is to stitch those corners just a little bit, just so I have nice corners. So I'm going to mark a little notch about 1 centimeter away from that corner on both sides. Here we go. So I'm leaving this opening So later I can turn my pouch right side out. So now we can take this to the machine and we're going to sew all 4 seams. We're going to start at the notch, we're going to sew all around, and then we're going to end at the other notch, making sure we are stitching each corner diagonally. So do not go to the very last point of your corner. You're going to stop, then pivot, and then stitch your corner diagonally. So you're going to do that on every single corner. If you want, you can take this to the pressing station, open your seam allowance along the sides and then press them nice and flat. Otherwise, you're going to take your scissors or your pinking shears, and then we're going to trim the seam allowance at the corners. And what I like to do is to trim the seam allowance at the sides slightly. So I don't go to the very end where I have the seam meeting. I like to keep the seam allowance full. So I'm going to trim the seam allowance at an angle like this. Trim the seam allowance diagonally at the corners. Keep full seam allowance around the opening. Now, using the opening we left in the lining, we can turn our pouch right side out. So since this is a very small opening, it might be a little bit tricky, but just take your time and I'm sure you can do it. Here we go. What you want to do next is to reach inside, open the seam allowance at the top. So where we left full seam allowance around those seams, you're going to open your seam allowance like this. Then you're going to bring the lining on top. So you basically are keeping open seam allowance on the external and lining pieces. You want to flip your lining down. This creates nice and neat corner. So I'm going to use a clip to just hold that in place, and then do exactly the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to reach inside, open my seam, on both the external and lining pieces, bring the lining down and push the lining inside my pouch. I'm going to again use a clip to just hold that in place. Push your lining inside. Just double check if you are happy with everything. If you are, then you can pull the lining out and we're going to close the opening in the lining. So what I like to do is to push those corners out. Here we go. Then what you can do is to fold the seam allowance under on both sides. Line up those folded edges. You can pin or clip them together just to hold everything in place. Here we go. And then what I'm going to do is to take this to the machine and I'm going to top stitch close to that folded edge, making sure I catch the fabric underneath. If you prefer more of a neat finish, you can close the opening by hand with a ladder stitch. Go ahead and insert your lining back into your pouch. Push on those corners, making sure everything is nice inside. I'm going to remove my clips. Now you can take your flexi frame, open it. And then what we're going to do is to feed it through the tunnels on our top trims. So just take your time, insert the frame into one tunnel and into the other one, just like that. And then feed that frame through until you get to the other end, just like that. Then what you want to do is to close that frame like this. Next, you're going to grab your little pin and we're going to insert that pin to lock everything in place. So just insert the pin for the opening. You might have to wiggle things if it's stuck. Then you want to grab scissors, pliers, or maybe something like a screwdriver, because we need to fold this little flap down to close that opening. So I like to use pliers and simply bring that down. So this requires a little bit of force, but I'm sure you can do it. Here we go. So you want to make sure that top is nice and flat. Here we go, just like that. Double check if your frame works. If you have to, give your pouch a final press. Otherwise, this project is now finished. Let me know what you think about this little project in the comments. If you enjoyed it, if you didn't, I would love to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, remember to subscribe to my channel for a similar content. See you next time. Stay crafty, friends. Bye.